In this episode, we're talking about debt, and specifically 3 ways that you can eliminate debt fast. So if you're in debt, then you probably know what it feels like to have that pressure, the pressure of credit card bills coming in, pressure maybe if you're in collections, having debt collectors call you. Maybe you're struggling to make the minimum payments, or maybe you just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel and you're wondering how you're going to get rid of that debt. Now, the good news is you're not alone. There are millions of people that are in debt up to their eyeballs, and millennials are actually way more likely to have consumer debt like credit cards over home ownership or a mortgage. Now, in my early 20s, I had about $95,000 in consumer debt. I was sold this American dream that said we needed the big house, the really nice cars, the latest and greatest TV, and that's what creates happiness. But I found myself living in a big-ass house that I didn't need, driving a really nice car and a really nice truck, had all the nice toys, but it felt empty. And it wasn't worth the pressure of having these credit card statements and these big numbers, what felt like big numbers at the time, staring me in the face. And even though I was making really good money at a corporate job, it just felt like I was on this wheel of doom or this debt cycle where it didn't matter what I did, it didn't matter how much money I made, my spending was always on par with my income, and because of interest on the debt, it just seemed like there was no end in sight. So thankfully, I was able to break that cycle, get out of corporate America, and eventually eliminate my debt. So let's talk about the 3 ways that you can use to eliminate debt. So step 1 is you want to start by paying off your most expensive debts first, even before saving. Now, let me explain. I think it's a smart idea to have some type of emergency savings. And unfortunately, about 40% of Americans can't afford a $2,000 emergency expense. So I think that's priority number 1, is to have some cash that if you have to go to the hospital or if you have car trouble or something like that, you have to have some cash to get you out of an emergency. But above that, if you have really expensive credit card debt with an interest rate in the teens or the 20s, the reality is that it's going to be much better for you to pay that debt off prior to trying to stack cash in a big savings account because of the way interest works. If you're paying 15, 20, 30% interest on credit cards and you're only earning maybe 1 to 2% in a savings account if you're lucky, the numbers just don't add up. You really need to pay that debt off, or else you're going to use interest against you instead of for you. Now, when it comes to paying off your most expensive debt, the first thing that you can do to take action right now is to negotiate with your debtors. I would actually invest more time hassling your debtors and your credit card companies or whoever you owe money, basically flipping the communication channel on its head and communicating with them, trying to negotiate better terms. For example, you could call and try to negotiate a lower interest rate. I think that is probably the most effective way to stop the cycle of doom, is to at least lower your interest rates as low as you can get them. Now, this is called a workout arrangement, and if you let them know that maybe you're having some hardship or the interest rate and the payments are just too high, a lot of times what they will do is work with you to set a lower payment or a plan that they feel will be a guaranteed way or a higher probability way of getting payments from you. So if you tell them, like, look, I can't afford this 19% or 29% interest rate, I'm just drowning and I'm not going to be able to make these payments, what they might do is lower that rate, lower the monthly payment, get you in a situation where you can make those payments, and at least that, with maybe a phone call or two, could save you thousands of dollars over the months and years. The second option that you have when it comes to negotiating is working out a lump sum payment. Let's say you have a little bit of savings that could cover that debt above, again, your kind of emergency payment. What you could do is negotiate a lower payoff. So, and this typically works better if you're already behind a couple of payments, or maybe you're in kind of like a pseudo collections phase in the debt collection process, where they go, okay, this person's really not able to make these payments. We're probably going to lose this debt and have to sell it to a collection agency. So let's see what we can potentially get from this person. So a lot of times you can negotiate a pretty big discount. Let's say you owe $10,000, you may be able to cut that in half with a lump sum payment and pay off maybe $5,000. So this is called a principal reduction, and basically by making one payment to pay off the entire debt, you're going to wipe that out. So after you understand that step number one is paying off your most expensive debts first, and you get a grasp on that, step number two is understanding the reality of the fact that you might need to make some temporary lifestyle adjustments. And nobody likes the word budget, but I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in debt up to my eyeballs, I had calls almost every day, nearly $100,000 in the hole. My cash reserves were depleting really quickly. I went to my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. She actually stuck with me through all this crap. And I told her, I was like, look, babe, we can't go out to dinner. We can't do what we've been doing. This lifestyle that, I was living in the corporate world, going out to fancy dinners and driving the cars and living in the big house and, traveling and all this stuff. This needs to come to a temporary halt while I go through a hustle period to work my way out of this. And it's not easy, and it's not necessarily fun, but it's very, very rewarding when you look back and you dig yourself out of that hole. Now we can eat at any restaurant we want. We've traveled to about 100 or so countries around the world, and that's no longer an issue. But whenever you are facing that reality of, look, we're in debt, we've been, upside down on our income to expenses, and we've just been kind of sinking lower and lower, you need to make some temporary lifestyle changes. For a lot of people, and at least it was like this with me, my most expensive unnecessary expense was alcohol. If you go out to a restaurant and say you have a few beers or a couple glasses of wine between a couple, that can, in a lot of cases, double your bill for what your dinner would cost. If the dinner was maybe $40-50, sometimes you could be pushing over $100 if you go to a restaurant and they have nice wine or good beer or liquor drinks. So step one could be cut out liquor completely, alcohol completely, unless maybe you want to buy a cheap six-pack or something like that for the house. The second would be to cut the cord on expensive cable subscriptions. A lot of people with Comcast or Time Warner, the average bill is well over $100 to $150 a month. You could actually cut that off and pay $8 to $12 a month for Hulu, or $10 a month for Netflix or something like that. And that right there could be an extra $100 a month that you could put towards your most expensive debts. And in addition to cutting out the expensive alcohol, you could cook in and dine out less. And if you have kids, instead of going and buying them a bunch of random toys that they don't really need, you could actually spend more time with them and go to a park or something free. So whenever you make these temporary lifestyle adjustments, and I like to say temporary because if it feels like this is a permanent life change, you're going to be way less likely to do it than if it's an experiment or a temporary fix to a bad situation. So once you start eliminating a lot of those unnecessary expenses, that'll allow you to reallocate a larger percentage of your net income to paying off those most expensive debts. And then it almost builds momentum where when you pay off the most expensive debt, and I always like to say start with the smaller debts too. That way you have a sense of accomplishment. But if you start chipping away at those major debts and you do everything you can to negotiate the best terms for those debts, you're going to really start to see quicker gains than you would if you just kind of paid it on autopilot or stuck your head in the sand. So the 4 steps that you use to do this is you work out your net income, you subtract out your expenses, and if possible, allocate 50% or more of your discretionary spending, basically all the leftover capital you have above the absolute necessary expenses, at least half of that, push towards those debts. And then once you start paying off the small and the most expensive debts, you'll really start to see some headway. And that brings us to step number 3, which I think is really the biggest game changer. Making lifestyle adjustments and paying off the most expensive debts and negotiating the best you can, that's a great start. But if you want to make massive leaps and bounds, you have to focus on your income. Because you might be listening to this saying, well, Chris, I don't have a lot of discretionary income after I pay my expenses. In fact, maybe you're barely breaking even. And if that's the case, saving a few dollars here and there might get you a little bit closer to getting out of debt. But step number 3, increasing your income or adding additional income sources is a way to really make fast leaps and bounds. And that's what I did. Instead of just focusing on saving money by not going out to dinner, which was a huge help for me, what I really focused on was how do I exponentially increase my income and my time freedom? How do I own my time and how do I make a lot more money? And that's really what ultimately led to me getting out of that bad situation. So how do you make more money? And in prior episodes, we talked about some examples, the 2 options that you have to create more income streams, and then specifically 7 ways that you can start generating an income online. So it's location independent. And I just want to give you kind of a few more options. So if you're saying, well, I don't really have a lot of resources, or maybe you're a little frustrated and you're like, what can I do right now to generate cash right now? One thing that's kind of easy, and I feel like most people have more crap, more physical material stuff that they don't use that they could get rid of. I call it purge and profit. So anything that you have of value that you're not using, sell it. Do a garage sale, sell it on Craigslist, sell it on eBay. That's just a fast way to get rid of crap that you don't need, kind of clean the cobwebs out of your life, and generate a little bit of extra capital that, again, put 100% of that money back into your most expensive debt. Another way that you could start generating income right away or very quickly without having to invest money in a business or a lot of capital in some kind of entrepreneurial venture is to freelance, hustle. There are people that need services, especially online, people that can write, that can provide customer service, administrative. Most people have at least a few hours in a day that they can dedicate to hustling to make a little bit of extra income. So just a quick recap. Step number 1, pay off your most expensive debts first. Negotiate like hell. Get them down as low as you can. Step 2, make incredible temporary lifestyle changes so you can allocate a bigger percentage of your net income and discretionary income to paying down that expensive debt. And then step 3, to make the biggest leaps and bounds, change your income. Add additional income sources, or at least hustle an extra few hours a day to get yourself out of that situation. Now, for more resources and the show notes, go to chrisdunn.com/008. That's for episode 008. And I have a whole lot of links and resources that will help you stay focused on that goal of paying down debt. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you in the next episode.